Daily habits that would shock us today. 25 strange habits of the ancient Romans. Imagine waking up in ancient Rome. The first rays of sunlight slip through wooden shutters, illuminating a city already alive with noise. Merchants are setting up their stalls. Bakers are pulling fresh loaves from stone ovens. The sound of iron wheels echoes across the paved streets as carts begin delivering goods to markets. You step outside. Within minutes, you realize something unsettling. Almost everything that feels normal to you would seem strange to the Romans. And almost everything they considered perfectly ordinary would shock us today. You might begin your morning by sitting beside complete strangers in a public toilet. You would clean your body without soap. You might brush your teeth using ingredients that modern dentists would strongly advise against. Later that day, you would spend hours in a crowded bathhouse with hundreds of other people. Then, if you were fortunate enough to be invited to dinner, you wouldn't sit at a table. You would lie down while eating. To the Romans, none of this was unusual. It was simply life. To understand ancient Rome, we must forget the modern world for a while. Because the greatest empire of antiquity was built by people whose daily routines were often as fascinating as their military victories. A city unlike any other. At its height, Rome was home to more than 1 million people. No city in Europe would match that population again for well over 1,000 years. Imagine trying to manage a city of that size without electricity. Without plumbing as we know it. Without modern medicine. Without cars. Yet Rome functioned. Its streets bustled with merchants, politicians, soldiers, slaves, craftsmen, teachers, and travelers from every corner of the empire. Crowded apartment buildings known as insulae rose several stories above narrow streets. Markets overflowed with goods arriving from Africa, Egypt, Greece, Spain, and the Near East. The city never truly slept. It simply changed rhythm. And with so many people living close together, daily habits evolved in ways that seem almost unbelievable today. Habit number 1. Public toilets were social places. If you needed a toilet in ancient Rome, you didn't search for privacy. You searched for company. Across the city stood large public latrines built from stone. Rows of marble seats lined the walls. Each seat contained a simple opening. There were no dividers. No doors. No private stalls. Dozens of people sat shoulder to shoulder. Talking. Laughing. Discussing politics. Negotiating business. Sometimes even making new friends. To modern eyes, it seems almost unimaginable. But Roman society placed far less importance on personal privacy than we do today. Using the toilet together wasn't embarrassing. It was ordinary. In many ways, these places functioned almost like cafes. People often stayed longer than necessary simply because conversations were enjoyable. Flowing water. Despite the lack of privacy, Roman public toilets were surprisingly advanced. Fresh water constantly flowed beneath the seats, carrying waste away through underground sewers. Another narrow channel of running water flowed in front of the users. Its purpose was not immediately obvious. It was used for cleaning. Which brings us to one of Rome's strangest everyday objects. Habit number 2. The tersorium. There was no toilet paper. Instead, Romans commonly used a tersorium. It was a sea sponge attached to the end of a wooden stick. After use, it was rinsed in running water, sometimes with vinegar or salt water, and placed back for the next person. The idea makes many people uncomfortable today. But to the Romans, it represented practical hygiene. Sea sponges were soft, reusable, and widely available throughout the Mediterranean. No one considered them unusual. Like many Roman customs, the practice reflected the resources and knowledge available at the time. Habit number 3. Urine was surprisingly valuable. Today, urine is simply waste. In ancient Rome, It was valuable. Extremely valuable. In fact, people collected it. Public containers stood along busy streets where citizens could relieve themselves. Workers gathered the contents and transported them to workshops. Why? Because urine naturally contains ammonia. Ammonia is an effective cleaning agent. Roman fullers, specialists who cleaned and finished clothing, used fermented urine to remove grease and dirt from wool garments. Workers stood inside large stone basins. Their job was simple. Step on the clothes repeatedly. Hour after hour. Allowing the ammonia to clean the fabric. The work was unpleasant. But remarkably effective. Roman togas worn by wealthy citizens often owed their brilliant white appearance to this unusual process. The Emperor Vespasian even introduced a tax on the collection of urine. When criticized, he reportedly held up a coin and asked whether it smelled. Money, after all, had no odor. Habit number 4. Some Romans used urine to whiten their teeth. Roman writers occasionally mention another unusual use for urine. Dental care. Certain people believed that ammonia helped whiten teeth. This wasn't considered disgusting. It was considered practical. Ancient medical knowledge was very different from ours. Romans experimented constantly with natural substances. Ashes. Crushed bones. Herbs. Charcoal. Salt. And yes, sometimes urine. While it may sound shocking today, they were attempting to solve the same problem we still care about. Keeping teeth clean. Modern dentistry simply offers much better solutions. Habit number 5. They didn't brush like we do. Toothbrushes as we know them did not exist. Instead, Romans cleaned their teeth using cloths, fingers, small twigs, or primitive brushes. Tooth powders often contained crushed oyster shells, charcoal, powdered bones, pumice, salt, or herbs. Some recipes were probably more effective than others. Others may have damaged tooth enamel over time. Yet Roman writers frequently emphasized the importance of fresh breath and clean teeth. Personal appearance mattered greatly. Especially among the wealthy. Good grooming reflected discipline, status, and self-respect. Hygiene meant something different. Modern people often imagine the ancient world as permanently dirty. The reality is more complicated. Romans cared deeply about cleanliness. They simply approached it differently. They lacked bacteria theory. They knew nothing about viruses. They had never heard of microscopic germs. Instead, they relied on observation and tradition. Flowing water seemed cleaner than standing water. Fresh clothing suggested health. Regular bathing signaled respectability. By the standards of their own time, many Romans considered themselves remarkably clean. Their method simply reflected the scientific knowledge available 2,000 years ago. The streets of Rome. Leaving the public latrine behind, you step back into the busy streets. Children run between market stalls. Bakers advertise warm bread. Fishmongers shout prices. Donkeys pull overloaded carts through crowded intersections. Above your head, apartment buildings lean toward one another across narrow streets. The smells constantly change. Fresh bread. Smoke. Wine. Animals. Spices arriving from distant provinces. Life in Rome overwhelmed every sense. And for many citizens, the next stop in their daily routine wasn't home. It was the bathhouse. A place unlike anything in the modern world. There, politics mixed with exercise. Business mixed with friendship. And nearly everyone, rich or poor, spent hours together beneath marble ceilings and rising clouds of steam. Because for a Roman, bathing was never simply about getting clean. It was one of the most important parts of everyday life. Baths, food, and strange beauty habits. 25 strange habits of the ancient Romans. If there was one place that truly reflected Roman society, it wasn't the Senate. It wasn't the Colosseum. It wasn't even the Forum. It was the public bathhouse. To modern visitors, the idea seems almost impossible to understand. Imagine spending 3 or 4 hours every afternoon in a building filled with hundreds, sometimes thousands, of strangers. Businessmen negotiated contracts. Politicians searched for supporters. Athletes exercised. Doctors offered advice. Philosophers debated ideas. Children played games. Friends laughed together. For the Romans, the baths weren't a luxury. They were simply part of everyday life. Habit number 6. The bathhouse was the center of Roman life. By the 1st century AD, nearly every Roman city had at least one public bathhouse. Rome itself had dozens. Some of the largest complexes covered several acres and could accommodate thousands of visitors every single day. Admission was inexpensive. Sometimes it was even free, paid for by wealthy politicians eager to gain popularity. Everyone came. Rich senators. Ordinary workers. Retired soldiers. Merchants. Travelers. Even emperors occasionally visited public baths. Although men and women often bathed separately, schedules varied depending on the city and the period. For many Romans, skipping the baths for several days would have seemed just as strange as skipping a shower would seem to us today. A carefully planned routine. Bathing wasn't rushed. Visitors followed a sequence that had been refined over centuries. First came the apoditorium, the changing room. Here they removed their clothing, placing it in small niches or handing it to servants. The wealthy often brought trusted slaves to guard their belongings. Because theft was surprisingly common. Once changed, many people headed to the exercise yard. Known as the palestra, this open space allowed visitors to prepare their bodies before bathing. Some wrestled. Others boxed. Many played a fast-paced ball game that required speed and coordination. Exercise wasn't separate from bathing. It was part of the experience. Only after working up a sweat did they move deeper into the complex. Habit number 7. Romans didn't use soap. One of the biggest surprises for modern visitors would have been the absence of soap. Although primitive forms of soap existed in some parts of the ancient world, Romans generally preferred another method. Instead of creating foam and washing it away, they covered their skin with olive oil. The oil trapped sweat, dust, dead skin, and dirt collected throughout the day. Then came a fascinating tool. Habit number 8. The strigil. The strigil looked like a curved metal blade. It wasn't sharp enough to cut the skin. Instead, it scraped away the layer of oil along with the dirt trapped inside it. The sensation was probably similar to a deep massage. Servants often performed the scraping for wealthy citizens. Others helped one another. Afterward, many visitors rinsed themselves in warm water before continuing through the baths. The process seems unusual today. Yet it worked surprisingly well. Especially in a warm Mediterranean climate where olive oil was plentiful. The journey through heat. Roman bathhouses weren't just pools. They were carefully engineered environments. Visitors moved through rooms of different temperatures. The tepidarium offered gentle warmth. It prepared the body for greater heat. Next came the caldarium. The hottest room. Steam filled the air. Marble walls radiated warmth. Hot pools allowed muscles to relax after exercise. Finally came the frigidarium. A room containing cold water. Stepping into it after intense heat shocked the body awake. Many Romans believed this cycle strengthened health. Modern spas still use remarkably similar ideas. Engineering that amazed the ancient world. The most remarkable part wasn't the luxury. It was the technology. Roman engineers developed an underfloor heating system known as the hypocaust. Large furnaces heated air beneath raised stone floors. That hot air circulated through hollow spaces beneath the building and inside its walls. The result was comfortable warmth throughout enormous bath complexes. This engineering achievement appeared nearly 2,000 years before central heating became common in modern homes. Even today, archaeologists remain impressed by its sophistication. Habit number 9. Bathhouses were places for business. Bathing was only one reason people came. Important political conversations happened here. Merchants negotiated deals. Lawyers met clients. Teachers held discussions. Friends exchanged gossip. If you wanted to know what was happening in Rome, you went to the baths. Some visitors spent far more time talking than washing. In many ways, bathhouses combined the functions of a modern gym, cafe, business center, social club, and community center. All under one roof. Habit number 10. Garum went on almost everything. After several hours at the baths, many Romans were ready to eat. And one ingredient appeared almost everywhere. Garum. To modern ears, it sounds unusual. It was a fermented fish sauce made by layering small fish, salt, and herbs inside large containers. The mixture remained in the sun for weeks or even months. As it fermented, a rich liquid formed. That liquid became one of the most valuable condiments in the Roman world. Garum-flavored vegetables. Bread. Meat. Seafood. Eggs. Stews. Even wine in some recipes. Different qualities existed. The finest varieties were expensive enough to become luxury items. Cheaper versions fed ordinary families across the empire. To Romans, a meal without garum often seemed incomplete. To many modern people, the smell would probably have been unforgettable. Habit number 11. Romans preferred eating while reclining. If you were invited to a wealthy Roman dinner, you might make one embarrassing mistake. You would look for a chair. There probably wouldn't be one. Formal dinners often took place in a room called the triclinium. Guests reclined on comfortable couches arranged around low tables. They leaned on one elbow while servants brought course after course. This custom originally came from the Greek world but became an important symbol of Roman status. Reclining wasn't simply comfortable. It demonstrated that you were wealthy enough not to hurry. Meals could last for hours. Between courses, guests discussed politics, poetry, philosophy, military campaigns, or the latest scandals from the imperial court. Entertainment often included musicians, dancers, poets, or storytellers. Dinner wasn't just about food. It was a social performance. Habit number 12. Beauty could be dangerous. Romans admired beauty. Especially pale, smooth skin. To achieve that ideal appearance, many wealthy women, and some men, used cosmetics made from substances we now know were harmful. Face powder sometimes contained lead. Certain skin creams included mercury compounds. Neither was recognized as dangerous at the time. Instead, these ingredients produced the fashionable pale complexion associated with wealth. After all, someone with pale skin clearly spent little time working outdoors. Fashion often reflected status. Even when the methods carried hidden risks. Habit number 13. Hair was a statement of identity. Hair mattered enormously in Roman society. Women created incredibly elaborate hairstyles using braids, curls, pins, ribbons, and sometimes wigs made from imported human hair. Blonde hair became especially fashionable after Roman contact with Northern Europe. Some wealthy women lightened their hair using mixtures of herbs or other bleaching techniques. Men also paid attention to grooming. A neatly trimmed beard, or later, a clean-shaven face depending on the era, communicated discipline and respectability. Barbershops became popular gathering places where customers discussed politics, local news, and sports while waiting for a haircut. Looking respectable wasn't vanity. It was part of one's public reputation. Looking beyond the marble. Today we often imagine ancient Rome through magnificent temples, triumphal arches, and colossal amphitheaters. But the true heart of Roman civilization beat inside ordinary places. The baths. The markets. The dining rooms. The barber shops. It was there that friendships formed. Businesses expanded. Political alliances began. And everyday customs passed from one generation to the next. Yet if Roman hygiene and dining seem unusual, their favorite forms of entertainment would surprise us even more. Because the same civilization that built breathtaking aqueducts and elegant bathhouses also packed enormous arenas to cheer spectacles that many people today would find difficult to watch. Entertainment, family and superstitions. 25 strange habits of the ancient Romans. If you walked through Rome on a festival morning, you would immediately notice something unusual. The streets were crowded. Vendors sold food from wooden stalls. Children ran through the crowds laughing. Musicians filled the air with the sound of horns and drums. Thousands of citizens were all moving in the same direction. Not toward a market. Not toward a temple. But toward an arena. To the Romans, entertainment wasn't simply a way to pass the time. It was an essential part of society. Emperors understood this better than anyone. A well-fed and entertained population was far less likely to rebel. The poet Juvenal famously described the secret of keeping the people satisfied with just two things: bread and circuses. Free grain. Spectacular entertainment. It was a formula that helped hold together one of history's greatest empires. Habit number 14. Watching gladiators was family entertainment. Today, most people associate gladiator combat with violence. The Romans saw something very different. They saw courage, discipline, honor, skill. Gladiators weren't random prisoners thrown into an arena. Many trained for years inside specialized schools. They followed strict diets, exercised daily, learned different fighting styles depending on their weapons. Some fought with heavy shields and short swords. Others carried nets and tridents. Each style required speed, precision, and incredible endurance. The crowds quickly learned to recognize famous fighters. Successful gladiators became celebrities. Children admired them. Women wrote about them. Their names appeared on walls in graffiti. Some even earned enough money to buy their freedom. Victories brought fame. Defeat often meant death. Although Hollywood often portrays every fight ending in execution, reality was more complex. Training gladiators was expensive. Owners preferred not to lose skilled fighters unnecessarily. Many matches ended when one combatant surrendered and the organizer decided whether he deserved mercy. Even so, every person entering the arena understood one thing: they might never leave it alive. Habit number 15. Public executions were considered entertainment. Before the afternoon gladiator fights began, another spectacle often filled the arena. Executions. To modern audiences this sounds horrifying. To many Romans, it represented justice. Criminals sentenced to death were executed before thousands of spectators. Some faced wild animals. Others were forced into staged reenactments of famous myths with deadly endings. Executions served several purposes. They punished crime. They demonstrated the power of the state. And they reminded every citizen what happened to those who challenged Roman law. Children sometimes witnessed these events alongside adults. No one considered this unusual. Life and death were far more visible in the ancient world than they are today. Habit number 16. Gambling was everywhere. Romans loved games of chance. Dice could be found almost everywhere. Soldiers played while stationed on distant frontiers. Merchants gambled after work. Ordinary citizens placed small bets with friends. Even emperors enjoyed gambling. Although strict laws occasionally attempted to limit betting, enforcement was inconsistent. People wagered money, jewelry, animals, even clothing. Some individuals lost fortunes. Others became surprisingly wealthy through luck alone. Dice made from bone, ivory, bronze, and stone have been discovered across the former Roman Empire. Their popularity crossed every social class. It didn't matter whether you were rich or poor. Almost everyone enjoyed taking a chance. Habit number 17. Romans were deeply superstitious. Despite their incredible engineering and military achievements, Romans constantly searched for signs from the gods. Nothing important happened without considering divine approval. A strange bird. An unexpected thunderstorm. A dream. An unusual birth. All could be interpreted as messages from supernatural forces. Even experienced generals sometimes delayed battles if they believed the omens were unfavorable. Religion and superstition weren't separate ideas. They were woven together into everyday life. The future felt uncertain. The gods, many believed, offered guidance to those who knew how to read the signs. Habit number 18. Protective amulets were everywhere. If you visited a Roman home, you would probably notice small objects hanging near entrances. Around children's necks. Inside bedrooms. Even attached to military equipment. These were amulets. People believed they protected against illness, bad luck, jealousy, and the evil eye. Children often wore a protective charm called a bulla, given shortly after birth. Many kept it until adulthood. Soldiers carried lucky objects into battle. Travelers packed charms before beginning long journeys. Whether they truly worked mattered less than the comfort they provided. For Romans, wearing protection against unseen dangers felt completely reasonable. Habit number 19. Birds could decide the fate of an army. One of Rome's oldest religious traditions involved observing birds. Special priests known as augurs studied their behavior. Which direction did they fly? How many appeared? What sounds did they make? To modern minds these questions seem unrelated to politics. To the Romans, they could determine the future. Before elections, military campaigns, major construction projects, or public ceremonies. Augurs performed rituals seeking approval from the gods. Ignoring bad omens could damage a leader's reputation. Even powerful generals hesitated to openly reject religious traditions that millions of citizens respected. Habit number 20. Families honored their ancestors every day. The Romans believed the dead remained an important part of family life. Many households displayed wax masks or portraits of ancestors. Their achievements were remembered. Their names spoken. Their examples honored. Families made offerings during religious festivals. Flowers decorated tombs. Food and wine were sometimes left as symbolic gifts. Remembering previous generations wasn't merely sentimental. It reinforced identity. Every Roman family saw itself as part of an unbroken chain stretching into both the past and the future. To forget one's ancestors was almost unthinkable. Home was more than a house. After the excitement of the arena faded, most Romans returned home before sunset. Some lived in elegant villas decorated with colorful mosaics. Others climbed several flights of narrow wooden stairs inside crowded apartment buildings. Yet regardless of wealth, home remained the center of Roman family life. Parents expected obedience. Children learned discipline from an early age. Servants and slaves often worked alongside the household every day. Family honor mattered deeply. Every action reflected not only on the individual, but on the entire household. These traditions helped shape Roman society for centuries. But perhaps the strangest customs of all weren't found in arenas or temples. They were hidden inside ordinary homes. Simple daily rituals that quietly reminded every Roman who they were, where they belonged, and what they owed to family, tradition, and the empire itself. And those final 5 habits reveal perhaps more about Rome than any battlefield ever could. The habits that built an empire. 25 strange habits of the ancient Romans. The strangest Roman habits were not always the most dramatic. They did not all involve blood in the arena, unusual cosmetics, or crowded public toilets. Some were quiet. Almost invisible. They happened every morning inside private homes, along city streets, and behind the doors of wealthy families. Yet these daily customs shaped Roman society more deeply than almost anything else. They taught people where they belonged, who they were expected to obey, which gods protected them, and how much of their lives depended on status, family, and tradition. Rome was not held together by armies alone. It was held together by routine. Habit number 21. Wealthy Romans received visitors every morning. For many powerful Romans, the working day began before sunrise. But they did not leave home immediately. Instead, they waited for visitors. Every morning, clients gathered outside the house of a wealthy patron. This ritual was known as the salutatio. A patron might be a senator, businessman, former military commander, or influential landowner. His clients were men who depended on his protection, money, recommendations, or political support. One by one, they entered the house to greet him. They dressed carefully. They waited patiently. They spoke respectfully. In return, the patron might offer advice, food, money, legal assistance, or help finding employment. The relationship was not exactly friendship. It was an exchange. The client demonstrated loyalty. The patron demonstrated generosity and power. A public display of influence. After the morning greetings, the patron often left his house for the forum. His clients followed him. The larger the group walking behind him, the more impressive he appeared. A man surrounded by dozens of followers looked powerful. A man walking alone looked unimportant. Roman politics depended heavily on public reputation. Appearances mattered. Support had to be seen. For a wealthy Roman, the morning procession was almost a daily advertisement of influence. For the clients, it was a reminder that survival often depended on knowing the right person. Modern people might call this networking. The Romans turned it into a formal social ritual. Habit number 22. Romans fed their household gods. Before leaving home, many Romans performed another daily custom. They honored the spirits who protected the household. Roman religion was not limited to enormous temples or public ceremonies. It lived inside the home. Many houses contained a small shrine called a lararium. It might be a painted niche in the wall, a small cabinet, or an elaborate miniature temple decorated with statues. The household worshipped protective spirits known as the lares. They were believed to watch over the home and family. The Penates were associated with food, storage, and the household's prosperity. Families offered them small gifts: wine, bread, incense, fruit, sometimes a portion of the evening meal. The gods were part of the family. These offerings were usually simple. Yet they were meaningful. Before an important journey, a Roman might pray at the household shrine. Before a marriage, the family might ask for divine protection. When a child was born, religious rituals welcomed the infant into the household. The gods were not distant beings who appeared only during festivals. They were part of everyday life. They stood beside the family through meals, business, illness, travel, and death. Even a wealthy senator who commanded soldiers and debated laws might still pause before a small shrine each morning. To ignore the household gods was to risk disorder inside the home. And for Romans, the home was the foundation of society. Habit number 23. Children were raised under strict authority. Roman childhood could be loving. But it was rarely permissive. At the center of the family stood the paterfamilias. He was the senior male head of the household. Traditionally, he possessed enormous authority over family property, marriages, finances, and important decisions. His children were expected to obey him even after reaching adulthood. The family did not operate as a collection of completely independent individuals. It operated as a hierarchy. Every person had a role. The father led. The wife managed much of the household. Children learned obedience. Servants and enslaved people performed countless tasks. Roman society believed order inside the home created order throughout the empire. Education through discipline. Children from wealthy families often received an education. They learned reading, writing, arithmetic, Greek literature, public speaking, history, and moral lessons drawn from the lives of famous ancestors. But education could be harsh. Teachers sometimes used physical punishment. Mistakes were not always treated gently. Discipline was believed to build character. Boys were prepared for public life, military service, law, politics, or business. Girls were usually educated for household management, marriage, and family responsibilities, although some wealthy women became highly literate. Roman parents worried deeply about reputation. A child's behavior reflected on the entire family. Disobedience was more than a private problem. It could become a public embarrassment. The transition to adulthood. For Roman boys, one of the most important moments came when they exchanged the toga praetexta, worn during childhood, for the plain white toga virilis of adult male citizenship. This ceremony usually took place during adolescence. The boy removed the protective bulla he had worn since childhood. He dedicated it to the household gods. Then his family escorted him into public life. He was no longer treated as a child. He now carried the responsibilities of a Roman citizen. The transition happened not privately, but before family, gods, and society. Even growing up was a public ritual. Habit number 24. Enslaved people were part of everyday life. One of the most disturbing realities of ancient Rome was the presence of slavery almost everywhere. Enslaved people worked in homes, farms, mines, workshops, bathhouses, shops, ships, schools, and government offices. They cooked meals, carried water, cleaned rooms, raised children, copied documents, managed accounts, taught languages, and sometimes advised powerful families. To most Romans, this system did not seem unusual. It was simply part of the social order. Slavery had many faces. Not every enslaved person lived under the same conditions. Some educated household slaves worked as tutors, secretaries, doctors, or accountants. They could develop close relationships with the families they served. Some were eventually freed. A freed person became known as a freedman or freedwoman. Many continued working for their former owners as clients or employees. Some became successful merchants. A few gained considerable wealth. But none of this changes the basic reality. Enslaved people had no true freedom. They could be bought, sold, separated from families, punished, or forced to work under brutal conditions. Those sent to mines or large agricultural estates often experienced especially terrible lives. A system hidden behind Roman luxury. The beauty of Rome depended heavily on forced labor. Marble villas required workers. Lavish dinners required cooks and servants. Large farms required field laborers. Public buildings depended on enormous numbers of people whose names were rarely recorded. When we admire Roman engineering, art, and wealth, it is easy to focus only on emperors and architects. But behind many achievements stood people who had no choice in the work they performed. For Romans, slavery was ordinary. For us, it remains one of the clearest reminders that an advanced civilization can still accept enormous injustice. Habit number 25. Romans lived according to status. Perhaps the most important Roman habit was not a single action. It was a way of thinking. Every Roman understood that society was divided by rank. Citizen and non-citizen. Free and enslaved. Rich and poor. Patron and client. Man and woman. Soldier and civilian. Senator and commoner. Status influenced almost everything. Where you sat in a theater. What clothing you wore. Which jobs you could hold. How the law treated you. Whom you could marry. And how much respect others were expected to show. Clothing revealed who you were. Romans did not always need to ask someone's position. They could often see it. The toga was strongly associated with male Roman citizenship. Different colors and decorations communicated rank. Senators wore clothing marked by a broad purple stripe. Members of the equestrian class used a narrower stripe. Certain officials wore special garments during public ceremonies. Children and magistrates could wear the purple-bordered toga praetexta. Clothing functioned almost like a visible social passport. It announced who belonged, who held authority, and who did not. Even entertainment followed the social order. Inside Roman theaters and amphitheaters, spectators did not simply sit wherever they wished. Seating reflected status. The most powerful officials occupied the best places. Senators sat close to the action. Other social groups were placed in designated sections. Women, foreigners, soldiers, and ordinary citizens could be separated according to the rules of the period. Even while watching entertainment, Romans were reminded of their place in society. The arena did not erase social hierarchy. It displayed it. Why these habits seemed normal? Many Roman customs feel strange to us because we live in a completely different world. We value privacy, individual freedom, scientific medicine, personal equality, and legal rights that did not exist in the same form 2,000 years ago. The Romans lived in a society shaped by survival, hierarchy, religion, war, and tradition. They did not wake each morning believing their habits were unusual. They believed their way of life was civilized, orderly, powerful, and in many ways superior to the societies around them. Public toilets seemed practical. Garum tasted familiar. The bathhouse felt comfortable. Omens provided guidance. Gladiators demonstrated courage. Household gods offered security. Patronage created opportunity. Strict family authority maintained order. Every custom made sense inside the Roman world. The contradictions of Rome. Ancient Rome was filled with contradictions. It built aqueducts that carried clean water across enormous distances. Yet many people lived in dangerous, overcrowded apartment buildings. It developed sophisticated laws. Yet those laws did not protect everyone equally. It celebrated discipline and courage. Yet it turned executions into public entertainment. It created beautiful poetry, architecture, and philosophy. Yet much of its prosperity depended on conquest and slavery. The same society could be refined and brutal. Practical and superstitious. Innovative and deeply traditional. That is what makes Rome so fascinating. It was not simply glorious. It was human. Final conclusion. Imagine returning to ancient Rome one final time. The sun rises over tiled rooftops. Clients gather outside the home of a senator. A family places bread before its household gods. Children prepare for lessons. Workers open shops along crowded streets. Fullers clean clothing with substances we would never use today. Citizens talk together inside public toilets. Bathhouses fill with steam. Food stalls serve bread covered in fish sauce. Augurs watched the sky for signs. And thousands of spectators moved toward the arena. No one stops to ask whether these habits are strange. To them, this is normal life. A world of rituals repeated every day across an empire stretching from Britain to Egypt and from Spain to Syria. Those habits helped Romans understand their place in society. They created relationships, reinforced authority, preserved traditions, and connected millions of people to the idea of Rome. Today, their customs may make us laugh, recoil, or stare in disbelief. But they also allow us to see beyond emperors, battles, and monuments. They reveal ordinary people. People who worried about their appearance, wanted clean teeth, enjoyed good food, searched for luck, raised families, made friends, feared illness, honored the dead, and tried to survive in one of the largest cities the ancient world had ever known. The Romans were different from us. But not completely. Behind every strange habit was a familiar human desire. To feel clean. To belong. To be respected. To stay safe. To entertain ourselves. To protect the people we love. And to believe that our way of life makes sense. That may be the most important lesson Rome leaves behind. The past often looks strange from a distance. But when we step closer, we begin to recognize ourselves.